My mother-in-law laughed when she saw me walk into the courtroom alone. She leaned toward the people sitting behind her and pointed at me. She doesn't even have a lawyer. A few people smiled. One man actually shook his head as if the verdict had already been decided. Then the side door opened. The judge walked in. He looked toward my table, then he looked directly at me. His expression changed. "Good morning, Colonel." The laughter stopped. My mother-in-law's smile vanished so quickly that, for one brief second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. My name is Laura Bennett. I'm 42 years old, and until 3 years ago, I wore the eagle insignia of a United States Army colonel. Almost everyone in that courtroom thought I was an ordinary widow, a quiet mother, a woman who had spent the last few years keeping to herself. They were right about the quiet part. They were completely wrong about everything else. I lived with my 11-year-old daughter, Emma, in a modest brick ranch house on the west side of Richmond, Virginia. Our life wasn't glamorous. Coffee before sunrise. Feed our golden retriever, Max. Wake Emma for school. Drive past Carytown while she finished her breakfast sandwich in the passenger seat. Normal routines. Simple routines. After everything we'd been through, normal felt like a luxury. My husband Daniel loved routines too. He used to joke that military families survived because somebody always knew what came next. Then one Tuesday morning, nothing came next. Daniel died during a National Guard helicopter training exercise outside Fort Pickett. The Army investigation ruled it an accident. But no official report could explain to an 8-year-old girl why her father wasn't coming home, and no report could explain to me how I was supposed to wake up the next morning and pretend the world still made sense. Daniel's parents were there in the beginning. Patricia and Richard Bennett brought casseroles. They hugged Emma. They cried with us at Arlington National Cemetery while soldiers carefully folded the American flag. For a while, I believed grief had brought us closer together. I couldn't have been more wrong. About 6 months after Daniel's funeral, Patricia began making little comments. They never should have let Daniel fly those dangerous missions. Then she'd look at me. "You always encouraged him to stay in. If he'd taken that engineering job in Charlotte, he'd still be alive." She never directly accused me of causing his death. She didn't have to. Every sentence carried the same message. "You took my son away." I tried to understand. Grief can make good people say cruel things. At least, that's what I told myself. But the comments became sharper. When Emma wanted to spend weekends with her grandparents, Patricia questioned my parenting. Why wasn't Emma in private school? Why did we live in such a small house? Why was I still driving an old Honda Pilot? Why wasn't I living the way Daniel's family thought I should? She constantly compared me to Daniel's older brother, Stephen, and his wife, Melissa. "They've done very well," she'd say. What she really meant was, "You haven't." The funny thing was, I could have afforded a much larger house. I could have bought a brand new luxury SUV. I could have lived very differently. I simply didn't care about appearances. After leaving the Army, I'd accepted a quiet consulting position with a nonprofit that helped veterans with legal problems. The pay wasn't spectacular, but between my pension, Daniel's survivor benefits, and years of careful saving, Emma and I were comfortable. Comfortable didn't impress Patricia. Appearances did. One Sunday after church, she stood in my kitchen while I made grilled cheese sandwiches for Emma. She looked around at the cabinets, the old countertops, the small dining table. Then she sighed. "You know, Daniel always deserved more." I put another slice of bread in the pan. He deserved a long life. She sighed again. "I meant financially." I looked at her. "I know what you meant." She smiled politely. The conversation ended, but I noticed Emma listening from the dining room. That bothered me more than Patricia ever could, because children remember things adults think they don't hear. Over the next 2 years, Patricia told relatives that I was emotionally unstable. She said military service had changed me. She told neighbors I barely left the house. At Thanksgiving, she announced to the entire table that I had been some kind of military office worker. A clerk, wasn't it? I simply passed the mashed potatoes. Daniel's hand had once squeezed mine under that same table. For 1 second, I almost reached for it. Then I remembered Daniel wasn't there anymore. Old habits can survive long after the people connected to them are gone. I quietly picked up my glass of iced tea. No, I said. I wasn't a clerk. Patricia laughed. Oh, right. Administrative management. I smiled. If that's what you'd like to believe. She rolled her eyes. You always were mysterious. No, I answered. Just private. There was a difference. Very few people outside the military knew exactly what I'd spent 20 years doing. Even Daniel never pushed me for details. He understood classified work. He'd simply ask, "Hard day?" Sometimes I'd nod. Sometimes he'd wrap his arms around me without asking another question. Those moments were enough. After he died, I packed every military plaque, commendation, photograph, and uniform into storage bins. Not because I was ashamed, because I wanted Emma to grow up with a mother, not a retired officer. Those weren't the same job. Then, 6 weeks before the court hearing, everything changed. A certified envelope arrived. Inside was a petition filed in Richmond Circuit Court. Daniel's parents wanted custody of Emma. They claimed I was emotionally unfit. They alleged that I isolated Emma from her extended family. They questioned my financial judgment. Then came the part that truly stunned me. They challenged my management of Daniel's survivor benefits. They wanted the court to appoint a financial conservator. I read the paperwork twice, then a third time. Finally, I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so disconnected from reality. Emma was thriving. Honor roll, soccer team, church youth choir. Weekly counseling, which she had chosen for herself after losing her father. Her pediatrician described her as resilient. Still, court is court. Facts don't always speak for themselves. Patricia had hired one of Richmond's most expensive family law firms. Friends told me to hire an equally aggressive attorney. I thanked them, then politely declined. There was a reason. On the morning of the hearing, I drove downtown before sunrise. I parked in the same public garage I'd used for years. I stopped at a small coffee shop. Black coffee. No sugar. Old habit. Then I walked 3 blocks to the courthouse carrying nothing except a worn brown leather folder I'd owned since my Army days. Inside were exhibits, notes, emails, financial records, court rules, everything organized. Nothing fancy. Just preparation. When I entered the courtroom, Patricia saw me immediately. She looked behind me, then beside me, then toward the doors. She was waiting for an attorney. Nobody came. Her smile slowly spread. She leaned toward Stephen and said loudly enough for half the room to hear, "She actually came alone." Then she looked directly at me. "You couldn't even afford a lawyer?" Several people turned. I met her eyes. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she laughed. "So you're representing yourself?" "I am." Her expensive attorney, Charles Donovan, adjusted his tie. He smiled with the confidence of someone expecting an easy morning. Then the courtroom doors opened. "All rise." I stood. The judge entered. He arranged a few files on the bench. Then his eyes found mine. Recognition, a slight smile. "Good morning, Colonel Bennett." Silence. Patricia blinked. Her smile disappeared. "Wait." She stared at me. "What?" Nobody answered. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Counsel, are both parties ready to proceed?" Charles Donovan stood. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge looked toward me. "Colonel Bennett?" "I am, Your Honor." Patricia leaned toward her attorney and whispered urgently. He frowned and quietly motioned for her to remain silent. I kept my eyes on the judge. I'd spent enough years in courtrooms to understand one simple truth. Emotion was expensive. Discipline was free. The hearing began with routine matters, introductions, procedural questions, confirmation that I'd knowingly waived my right to outside counsel. The judge looked directly at me. "Mrs. Bennett, you understand you're representing yourself?" "I do." "And you've reviewed the local rules of procedure?" "Several times." He nodded. I expected as much. Patricia heard those words. She didn't understand them. Not yet. During a short recess, I stepped into the hallway outside courtroom 3B. The marble floors reminded me of federal courthouses all over the country. Washington. Fort Bragg, Fort Hood, Fort Belvoir, places I'd hoped never to revisit after retirement. A young deputy clerk approached carrying several files. She smiled. It's nice to see you again, Colonel. I smiled back. It's been a while. It has. She laughed softly. My father still talks about one of your trials. I felt my stomach tighten. I hope only the legal parts. She smiled. He says you taught him what integrity looked like. I thanked her quietly. She walked away. Then I heard heels behind me. Patricia. She stopped several feet away. What is going on? What do you mean? The judge, the clerk. Everyone keeps calling you Colonel. I was one. She stared. No. Yes. You never told us? You never asked. Her face tightened. I knew you worked. For the army. I did. I thought you were an administrative officer. Practiced law. She frowned. You were a military lawyer? Yes. As a prosecutor? Yes, she stared at me. Prosecuting what? I looked through the courthouse window toward Broad Street. Cars moved. Normally, people hurried toward work. Life outside continued as if nothing important was happening. I prosecuted serious crimes. What kind? I met her eyes, the kind people don't usually ask about twice. Before she could ask another question, the bailiff called everyone back. As I returned to the courtroom, memories I'd spent years locking away began coming back. I was 24 when I entered the Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. It was only a few years after September 11th. Like so many Americans, I wanted my career to matter law. School had given me a profession. The Army gave it purpose. Started with straightforward military justice. Cases, theft, fraud, drug offenses. Unauthorized absences. Nothing extraordinary. But over the years, my assignments changed. The Army noticed who stayed calm under pressure, who prepared thoroughly, who could question a witness without turning every hearing into a performance. Eventually, I received orders that changed my career forever. Special. Investigations. Joint Task Forces International. Cases war crimes, detainee. Abuse. Civilian contractor corruption. Cases. Involving officers whose names regularly appeared in newspapers. Most Americans never heard about 90% of those investigations. That was intentional. Justice often happened quietly. Some trials lasted months, others lasted years. I interviewed survivors through translators, studied satellite photographs, read thousands of pages of reports, sat across from people accused of terrible things while they insisted they'd done nothing wrong. Those experiences changed me, not in some dramatic Hollywood way. They simply made ordinary life feel precious. Grocery, shopping, school concerts, cutting the grass on Saturday morning, those things became gifts. Daniel understood that better than anyone. We met at Fort Lee. During a legal briefing, he was a helicopter pilot with the Virginia National Guard. He asked me out for coffee. I said no, twice. The third time, he smiled. I'll keep asking until the answer changes. I laughed. It did. We married 18 months. Later, he never pushed me to discuss work. Sometimes I'd come home, exhausted after reviewing evidence all day. He'd hand me a glass of ice at tea. Want silence or conversation? Usually I'd say silence. He understood. When Emma was born, everything shifted. The Army remained my career. She became my reason. As I advanced through the ranks, the responsibilities became larger. Eventually, I pinned on Colonel. It was one of the proudest moments of my life. Daniel stood beside me in dress uniform. Emma, only 6 years old, saluted me with complete seriousness. Then she burst into laughter. That photograph stayed on my bedroom dresser until the day Daniel died. After his funeral, I packed it away, not because I stopped loving those memories, because every time I looked at them, I remembered what we'd lost. Retirement. Wasn't really retirement, it was escape. I accepted consulting. Work with a nonprofit helping veterans navigate legal problems. Benefits, appeals, housing disputes, employment rights. Nobody cared about my rank. I preferred it that way. When people asked what I'd done before, I'd simply say I practiced military law. Technically true, comfortably incomplete. Back inside the courtroom, Charles Donovan began presenting his argument. He described me as isolated, secretive, emotionally distant. Then he made his biggest mistake. He tried to turn my military background into evidence against me. Mrs. Bennett has struggled to maintain healthy relationships because of experiences she refuses to discuss. I listened without reacting. Was trying to turn privacy into instability. Maybe Patricia had believed the same thing. She'd mistaken silence for weakness. The judge turned toward me, Mrs. Bennett. I stood. My response will come through evidence rather than speeches. Your Honor, he nodded. Very well. The courtroom clerk brought a stack of exhibits to my table. She placed them carefully in front of me. Then she smiled. Everything's organized exactly the way you always liked it. Colonel, the word echoed. Colonel. Patricia slowly turned toward me. For the first time that day, uncertainty replaced confidence. Not fear. Not yet. But the certainty she'd walked into the courtroom with was beginning to crack, and she still had no idea how much she didn't know. After lunch, the atmosphere changed. People kept looking toward me, not because I'd suddenly become important, because people hate unanswered questions. Who was I? Why did the judge know me? Why did the courtroom staff speak to me like someone they'd known for years? Patricia was wondering the same thing. Judge Harold Whitmore returned at 1 o'clock. Let's continue. Charles Donovan called Patricia to the witness stand. She took the oath. Then he asked, "Why are you asking this court for custody of your granddaughter?" Patricia looked toward Emma. "Because I love her." No one disputed that. "And why do you believe Laura is unable to provide the stability Emma needs?" She sighed. "Ever since my son's death, she's become withdrawn." She dabbed her eyes. "She isolates Emma. Can you explain?" "She rarely brings Emma to family gatherings." I wrote one word in my notebook. Rarely. Not never. Words matter, Patricia continued. She keeps secrets. What kind of secrets? I honestly don't know. A few people shifted uncomfortably. She hurried to explain. I mean, she never tells anyone anything. What do you mean? I don't know where she goes. I don't know who she talks to. I don't know what she really did in the army. She looked toward me. For years, I believed she was an administrative officer. A pause. Apparently. I was wrong, Donovan continued. Did Laura ever intentionally mislead your family? I believe she did. How? By pretending to be ordinary. The sentence hung in the air. Judge Whitmore looked over his glasses. Donovan changed direction. Has Emma ever expressed fear around her mother? No. Has Laura ever struck Emma? No. Neglected her? No. Failed to provide food, housing, education, or medical care? No. So your concern isn't abuse? No. Then what is it? Patricia answered quietly. She isn't emotionally available. There it was, the real accusation. Not abuse, not neglect, not danger. Feeling, Donovan finished. Your witness. He sat down. Stood, cross-examination. I walked toward the witness stand carrying only a yellow legal pad. No dramatic pause, no performance, just facts. Good afternoon. Patricia. She looked uncomfortable. Hello. You testified that we've grown distant. Yes. How many times did you ask to visit Emma during the past 12 months? I don't remember. I do. I opened my notebook. 23. Her eyes widened. You declined 17 of those invitations. Donovan stood. Objection. Counsel is testifying. I'll provide the supporting emails. Judge Whitmore nodded, overruled. Copies were handed to the bailiff. Patricia stared at the pages. You were invited for Thanksgiving. Silence. For Emma's school. Concert. Silence. For her birthday. Silence. Correct? Yes. You chose not to attend. I was busy. You were on a cruise. She looked down. Yes, I continued. You also testified that I isolate Emma. Yes. Does Emma participate in soccer? Yes. Church youth choir? Yes. Summer science camp? Yes. Sleepovers? Yes. So she's socially active? Yes. Honor roll? Yes. Regular counseling after losing her father? Yes. The counseling you personally recommended? She hesitated. Yes. I smiled gently. Thank you. Then I asked the question I'd been saving. When Daniel was alive, how many times did you ask him what I actually did in the army? Patricia blinked. I don't remember. Did you ever ask me? No. So when you believed I was an administrative officer, that was an assumption? She swallowed. Yes. I nodded. Thank you. I returned to my table. No raised voice. No humiliation. Just truth. The next witness was our neighbor, Carol Simmons. She'd lived across the street from us for 6 years. Donovan asked whether I'd become withdrawn. Carol said I was private. Then I questioned her. Carol, we've borrowed sugar from each other before? She laughed. More than once. You've watched Max when Emma and I traveled? Yes. When my water heater burst, you helped me clean the basement. Yes. When your husband had knee surgery, I drove him to physical therapy. Carol smiled. You did? So when you described me as private, you didn't mean unfriendly? No. What did you mean? Carol smiled. You don't gossip. The courtroom laughed. Even Judge Whitmore smiled. Carol continued. Laura doesn't talk much about herself, but she shows up whenever someone needs help. Donovan closed his eyes for half a second. He hadn't expected that answer. Neither had Patricia. Then came Stephen Daniel's older brother. Stephen was polished, perfect haircut, tailored. Navy suit, expensive watch. The kind of man who never seemed to sweat. He took the witness stand confidently. Donovan asked about my relationship with. The conversation had been selectively printed. Donovan told the court the messages proved I'd repeatedly refused family contact. The judge looked toward me. Any objection? Not to authenticity, Your Honor, he raised an eyebrow, but to completeness. Explain. The conversation has been selectively printed. Donovan frowned. They're accurate. I didn't say they weren't. I stood. They're incomplete. Judge Whitmore folded his hands. Do you have the full exchange? I do. I reached into my leather folder. I anticipated this. The bailiff distributed my copies. The judge compared both versions, his eyebrows lifted. Several pages were missing from the petitioner's evidence. One message read, Stephen, Mom's upset. Give her a little time. My response, of course. Tell her she's welcome for dinner next Sunday. Emma misses everyone. Another message. Sorry, we're going to Myrtle Beach that weekend, maybe next month. Another. Emma's school play is Friday. We'd love to have you there. No response. The silence inside the courtroom became uncomfortable. Judge Whitmore looked toward Donovan. Counsel? Donovan stood. Your Honor, I was provided only the documents my client supplied. I understand. The judge's voice remained calm. But the court prefers complete conversations. So do I said quietly. Donovan nodded. So noted. I looked at Stephen. For the first time, he looked nervous. I began my cross-examination. Good afternoon, Stephen. Laura. We've known each other almost 16 years. That's right. You've always considered yourself honest? I try to be. I believe you. That surprised him. It also relaxed him. People answer differently when they don't expect an attack. You testified that I stopped communicating. Yes. Did I invite your family to Emma's 10th birthday? Yes. Her 5th grade graduation? Yes. Christmas dinner? Yes. You declined. We had other plans. Every time? He hesitated. Mostly. I looked down at my notes. Do you remember calling me last October? I do. You asked whether Emma could stay with you for a weekend? Yes. And what did I say? He looked uncomfortable. You agreed. Without hesitation? Yes. So I trusted you with my daughter? Yes. You trusted me enough to let her come? Yes. Does that sound like someone trying to destroy family relationships? He didn't answer. Judge Whitmore looked over. You may answer. No. Thank you. I paused, then asked, Stephen, who suggested filing this lawsuit? His eyes shifted. My mother. Did you think it was a good idea? Long silence. Finally, no. Patricia stared at him. What? Stephen looked toward her. I told you we shouldn't do this. The courtroom became completely still. You said Laura would never fight back. Patricia's face drained of color. Stephen continued, "You said she'd settle." "I thought you were wrong," Patricia whispered. "Stephen." But it was too late. The judge called a recess. I stepped outside. I needed air. The courthouse windows overlooked Capitol Square. People crossed the sidewalks carrying lunch. A city bus rumbled past. Life continued. Mine felt suspended. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I wasn't in Richmond. I was overseas. Another courtroom, another set of witnesses, another group of families waiting for answers. I remembered mothers who would never see their sons again, young soldiers testifying through tears, children caught in places they never should have been. Those memories never disappear. You simply learn where to keep them. Then a familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. "Colonel." I opened my eyes. Michael Torres stood in front of me, older now, more gray hair, still standing perfectly straight. "Mike." He smiled. "It's been too long." It has. Mike and I had worked together for almost 8 years. He'd been a senior Army criminal investigator. We'd interviewed hundreds of witnesses together. "I heard your name was on today's docket," he said. "You came?" "I was already in Richmond," he smiled. "Thought you might appreciate a familiar face." Before I could answer, the bailiff stepped into the hallway. "Mrs. Bennett?" "Yes?" "The judge has approved your witness request." Mike looked at me. "You finally decided?" I nodded. I didn't want to. But I have to. Back inside the courtroom, I called Michael Torres as my witness. He took the oath. "How do we know each other?" I asked. "We worked together." "For how long?" "Almost 8 years." "What was my role?" "You were lead prosecutor." "What kinds of cases?" He took a slow breath. "The hardest ones." "Can you be more specific?" "War crimes, corruption, abuse investigations." The courtroom went silent. "Did you ever observe me ignoring evidence to protect someone's reputation?" "No." "Did I ever decline a case because the accused held a high rank?" Mike almost laughed. "No." Then he looked directly at the judge. "She prosecuted a 2-star general." The room froze. Donovan objected. "Relevance," I answered calmly. "It goes directly to my character for honesty and integrity, which the petition challenges." Judge Whitmore nodded. "Overruled." Mike continued. "Laura lost promotions because she refused political pressure." He looked at me. "She did what was right even when it hurt her career." I hadn't expected those words. They hurt more than they helped. Because they reminded me of choices I'd spent years trying not to revisit. The victories, the sacrifices, the friends I'd buried. For the first time all day, I wondered whether reopening that part of my life had been worth it. Then I looked toward Emma. She smiled. Just a small smile. Quiet, certain. And I remembered why I was there. Not to prove who I'd been, to protect who she could become. Mike stepped down from the witness stand. As he passed my table, he gave me the smallest nod. No celebration. No dramatic smile, just quiet encouragement. That was Mike. He'd never believed in unnecessary drama. He believed facts should carry their own weight. After nearly 6 hours in court, I was exhausted. Representing yourself sounds empowering when people talk about it afterward. Living through it is different. Every question has to be precise. Every exhibit has to be organized. Every emotion has to stay under control. There isn't another attorney beside you to whisper advice. If you make a mistake, it's yours. Judge Whitmore looked toward me. "Mrs. Bennett, do you have another witness?" "I do, Your Honor. I call Chaplain David Reynolds." A tall man in his early 60s walked to the witness stand. Silver hair, calm expression. He still carried himself like the Army officer he'd once been. We had served together during one of the hardest periods of my career. He took the oath. I smiled. "It's good to see you again, Chaplain." "You too, Colonel." Patricia closed her eyes. She was clearly tired of hearing that title. I almost smiled. "How? Do we know each other?" "We served together for almost 4 years." "What was your role?" "I was the senior chaplain assigned to the command." "And mine?" You were the chief prosecutor. He folded his hands. But that title doesn't tell the whole story. I hadn't asked that. He volunteered it. Donovan objected. The judge allowed limited explanation. David looked toward the bench. I've worked with hundreds of attorneys over the years. He paused. Some were exceptionally talented. Some weren't. But Colonel Bennett was different. He described watching me meet with grieving families after trials, explaining legal decisions to parents who didn't understand military law, spending hours helping young soldiers find counseling after difficult testimony. Then he said something that stayed with me. People assume prosecutors enjoy winning. He looked toward me. Laura never saw it that way. She believed justice wasn't about defeating someone. It was about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. My throat tightened. I hadn't expected that. The chaplain smiled. One evening after a particularly difficult case, I found her sitting alone outside the chapel. I asked if she wanted to pray. A few people smiled. She said no. Soft laughter moved through the courtroom. Then she asked if I'd sit there anyway. I looked down. That memory had been buried for years. David stepped down. I looked at Emma. She was watching me with wide eyes. Later, I realized something. She was learning things about me she'd never known, not because I'd hidden them, because she'd been too young to understand. Now she was finally seeing the woman behind the word, Mom. That mattered more than anything else happening in that courtroom. Charles Donovan stood for his grief doesn't belong to one side. The courtroom remained completely still. But grief also doesn't give any of us permission to rewrite reality. I gestured toward the exhibits. The evidence shows I encouraged contact. It shows Emma is healthy. It shows she succeeds in school. It shows she has friends. It shows she receives counseling. It shows she is loved. I paused. My military career isn't why I should keep custody. It simply explains why I stayed calm when accusations were made. Then I looked toward Emma. I'm not asking this court to reward me for serving. I'm asking it to let my daughter continue growing up in the stable home she's always known. I returned to my seat. For several long moments, Judge Whitmore reviewed his notes. No one spoke. Finally, he removed his glasses. The court is prepared to rule. Every heartbeat seemed louder. This case is not about wealth. It is not about military service. It is not about social standing. It is about the best interests of one child. He reviewed the evidence, school records, medical records, counseling reports, witness testimony, emails, financial statements. Then he looked directly at Patricia. The petitioner has failed to establish that Mrs. Bennett is an unfit parent. He paused. The evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates the opposite. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. The petition for custody is denied. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Not in triumph. In relief. Judge Whitmore continued. The court also finds that several allegations presented lacked factual support and unnecessarily prolonged these proceedings. He ordered Patricia and Richard to reimburse a substantial portion of the court costs. It wasn't revenge. It was accountability. The gavel came down. This matter is concluded. Outside the courthouse, late afternoon sunlight reflected off the windows across Broad Street. A few reporters waited near the front steps. One approached me. Mrs. Bennett? I stopped. May I ask one question? Of course. Why didn't you ever tell your husband's family you were a colonel? I looked toward Emma. She was laughing while Max chased a squirrel across the lawn. Then I answered. Because rank isn't who you are. It's just a job you once had. I smiled. What mattered most to me was being Daniel's wife. I looked at Emma. And now, being her mother. The reporter thanked me. As we reached the parking garage, I heard someone call my name. Laura. I turned. Patricia stood several yards away. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, emotionally. For the first time in years, she wasn't trying to win. She walked toward me slowly. I owe you an apology. I waited. I spent 3 years believing things that weren't true. Tears filled her eyes. I was angry. I needed someone to blame. She looked down. And blaming you was easier than accepting I couldn't save my son. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I nodded. I know. She looked surprised. I don't hate you, Patricia. I never did. She wiped her eyes. I don't expect forgiveness. I know. Another silence. Then she looked toward Emma. May I call her sometime? I smiled gently. You never had to ask. Her shoulders dropped. Maybe she'd been carrying that weight for years. We weren't suddenly a perfect family. Real life doesn't work like that. Trust isn't rebuilt in one conversation. It comes back slowly. Phone call by phone call. Birthday by birthday. Small choices repeated over time. 6 months later, Patricia attended Emma's 7th grade choir concert. She sat quietly in the second row. Afterward, she hugged Emma. Then she hugged me. It was awkward, a little stiff, and completely genuine. As for me, I continued helping veterans with legal problems. Some afternoons, I'd meet a young soldier who believed his life had fallen apart. I'd listen. I'd offer practical advice. I'd remind them that today's setback didn't have to define tomorrow. In many ways, I was telling myself the same thing. Looking back now, I realize revenge wasn't what satisfied me. The satisfaction came from refusing to become the person grief expected me to become. The truth didn't need anger to win. It needed patience, preparation, and the courage to stand quietly until it was heard. Because sometimes the person everyone underestimates isn't weak. Sometimes they're simply waiting for the facts to speak. And when the truth finally walks into the room, it doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be heard. If this story stayed with you, I hope it reminds you that dignity can speak louder than pride, and that being underestimated doesn't mean you've been defeated. Thank you for spending this time with me. And if you'd like to hear another emotional story about resilience, family, and finding strength when everything seems lost, I'd be grateful to have you back.